In April 1476, Leonardo da Vinci was arrested. He was 24 years old, not yet famous, still an apprentice in someone else's workshop. And someone, to this day unknown, had dropped an anonymous note in a box on a church wall, accusing him of a crime that carried the death penalty. The note has survived. Historians have read it. And when you see exactly what it said and who else it named, the whole thing stops looking like an accident. This is the story of the morning that almost erased everything. The Mona Lisa, the Last Supper, all of it, and what Leonardo became because of it. Florence in 1476 was one of the most brilliant cities on earth. Art, money, power, all of it concentrated in one place. But underneath all that beauty, it was also a city with an obsession. Back in 1432, the Florentine government created an entire department, staffed, funded, fully operational, whose only job was to hunt down men accused of homosexuality. They called them the Officers of the Night, and they were not messing around. Over the 70 years they operated, they opened cases against more than 16,000 men, in a city of 40,000 people. Nearly 1 in 3 men in Florence passed through a homosexuality investigation at some point. Nearly 3,000 were actually convicted. What historians find particularly striking, however, is the apparent contradiction this presents. Homosexuality in Florence wasn't really that scandalous on the street level. It was everywhere. The Medici, the most powerful family in the city, openly tolerated it in their circles. It was so common that Germans literally started using the word Florentine as slang for a gay man. Across much of Europe, it had become something of an accepted association with the city. So you had this city where everybody knew what was going on. Nobody really cared that much, and yet there was an entire government squad dedicated to prosecuting it, with thousands of files and the power to imprison or execute anyone they caught. What that created was a weapon, a very specific, very dangerous weapon that anyone with a grudge could pick up and point at whoever they wanted. And on the morning of April the 9th, 1476, someone picked it up and pointed it at Leonardo da Vinci. Here's the thing about this story that most people don't know. The actual note has survived. Historians have read it. And when you see exactly what it said, the whole thing starts to feel a lot more calculated than just an angry tip-off. It read, and this is the real text: I testify that Jacopo Saltarelli, brother of Giovanni Saltarelli, is staying with him in the goldsmith's workshop in Vaccarezia, just across the Bucco. He dresses in black and is about 17 years old. This Jacopo indulges in numerous immoral acts and willingly satisfies the desires of persons who demand such sinful things of him. Then it lists 4 names: a tailor named Bacino, a goldsmith named Bartolomeo di Pasquino, Leonardo da Vinci, described as living with Verrocchio, his master, and a young man named Leonardo Tornabuoni. Now, look at what the note is doing. It doesn't just accuse, it builds a whole picture first. It gives Saltarelli's address, his age, what he wears, his brother's name, the exact location of the shop, and it hints, heavily, that there are dozens more men involved, names the writer is choosing to hold back. This is not someone who dashed off an angry note in 5 minutes. Whoever wrote this knew these people, knew their world, knew exactly which details would make the officers of the night take it seriously. And then they walked away without signing it, which, as it turns out, was a massive legal problem, because here's where the story gets genuinely interesting. Under Florentine law, sodomy accusations filed in the tamburo had to be signed. Not necessarily made public. The accuser's name could stay secret from the general population. But it had to be on the paper. The officers of the night needed to know who was making the claim. This note had no name. Legally, it was worthless. The officers of the night opened the case anyway. They called Leonardo and the others in, and Leonardo was actually held for a few hours. But when it came to pushing for a proper conviction, the case had no legs. In April, they couldn't get it over the line. So they dismissed it. Conditionally. No new accusations show up in the box. This goes away. Then, on June the 7th, 2 months later, the exact same accusation appeared in the tamburo again. Same note, same names, same no signature. Dismissed again for the same reason. Now, why would someone file an unsigned note twice? If they knew the law, they knew it wouldn't hold up. So either they genuinely didn't know the rules, which if you knew enough to use the tamburo seems unlikely, or they weren't actually trying to get a conviction at all. Before we get into who might have written that note and why, let's just be clear about what Leonardo was actually facing. Because sodomy in Florence wasn't a fine. It was a slap on the wrist and a stern warning. The punishments were brutal, and they escalated depending on your age, your history, and how much the officers of the night felt like making an example of you. First offense: if you were young, you might get away with a public flogging and a fine. Humiliating, yes. Career-ending, possibly, but survivable. Second offense: exile. You were removed from Florence entirely. Your workshop, your patrons, your reputation, your entire life. Gone. You left and you didn't come back. And for repeat offenders, or cases the authorities deemed serious enough, death. Not metaphorical career death, actual execution. The standard method was burning at the stake. Public, visible, designed to send a message. And here's the thing. Out of the 16,000 men the officers of the night investigated over 70 years, nearly 3,000 were convicted. This wasn't a theoretical risk. It was a system that had already destroyed thousands of lives in the same city, on the same streets, in living memory of people Leonardo walked past every day. He was 24 years old. He had no powerful family name, no political connections, no safety net. If that hearing had gone differently, the world doesn't get Leonardo da Vinci. It gets a cautionary tale that Florence told its apprentices to keep them in line. Here's where historians split, because nobody knows who wrote that note. The person who dropped it into the box on April the 9th, 1476, has never been identified. But there are three main theories, and they each paint a very different picture of what was really going on that night. Theory 1. It was genuine, and the accuser was protecting themselves. Maybe Leonardo and the others actually were involved with Saltarelli, and someone who knew about it wanted them investigated. They filed anonymously because they didn't want their own name dragged into a sodomy case, even as the informant. The legal failure wasn't a strategy, it was an accident. And when the first note got thrown out, they tried again, because they were genuinely angry and didn't know what else to do. Theory 2. This was a political hit, and Leonardo was collateral damage. Look at that fourth name again. Leonardo Tornabuoni. That surname was not random. The Tornabuoni family was directly tied to Lorenzo de' Medici, the most powerful man in Florence, because Lorenzo's own mother had been a Tornabuoni. Florence in 1476 was politically tense, There was a serious faction that opposed the Medici, a church-backed religious movement that hated everything the Medici stood for. Dropping a Tornabuoni name into a public sodomy accusation wasn't just embarrassing, it was a direct strike at the Medici family's reputation. Leonardo, young and nobody, may have just been added to make the accusation look broader. He wasn't the target. He was the background noise. Theory 3. Someone in the art world wanted Leonardo gone. By 1476, Leonardo had already become something rare and slightly threatening. A young artist who was genuinely better than his master. His teacher, Verrocchio, one of the most respected figures in Florence, had reportedly been so overwhelmed by Leonardo's talent that he'd vowed to stop painting himself. In a city full of competing workshops and ambitious apprentices, that kind of talent made enemies. Filing an unsigned accusation cost nothing. If it worked, brilliant, the competition disappears. If it didn't, no signature, no accountability, nothing to trace back. Whatever the motive was, something happened during those 2 months that nobody had fully expected. When the case was being heard, people came forward to defend Leonardo. Citizens of Florence. People who knew him. And one of them was Verrocchio himself. Think about what that meant. Verrocchio was not just a well-liked teacher. He was a major figure, producing work for the Medici family, running one of the most respected workshops in the city, standing before the officers of the night and publicly vouching for someone accused of sodomy was no small thing. It was a real risk. And he did it anyway. On top of that, the Tornabuoni family almost certainly made some calls. Historians are faintly confident about this part. The case had no signature, no witnesses, no confession. But cases without those things had still moved forward before when the officers of the night wanted them to. The fact that this one didn't, twice, points strongly toward pressure arriving from somewhere with real political weight. And the only person in that courtroom with that kind of connection was the young man sharing a famous name on that note. Leonardo walked out, technically free. But something about him was different after that. Before we get to what happened to Leonardo, it's worth pausing on Saltarelli for a second, because he usually just gets a line in this story and then disappears. Jacopo Saltarelli was 17. He worked in his brother's goldsmith shop on the Vaccherizia, one of the main commercial streets in Florence. And here's the detail that changes the context of the whole accusation. His name was already in the officers of the night's files before April the 9th. Another man had already been convicted of sodomy with him earlier that same year. So Saltarelli was not unknown. He moved through the artistic circles of Florence, workshops, ateliers, the same streets Leonardo walked every day. He posed as a model. He was known to artists. Whether he was a victim, whether he operated with some form of agency in a world that had almost no protections for someone his age and background, whether the truth is something more complicated than either, the historical record can't clearly answer that. What it can say is that whoever chose to put his name at the top of that note knew exactly who he was and what his name would trigger. Here's the thing that makes this whole story genuinely terrifying in hindsight. In April 1476, Leonardo da Vinci had done almost nothing yet. The Mona Lisa didn't exist. The Last Supper hadn't been imagined. The notebooks with flying machines, anatomical drawings, ideas about physics and nature and the human body that the rest of the world wouldn't catch up to for centuries, were basically empty. One different outcome in that hearing room, and none of it ever happens. No Mona Lisa, no Last Supper, no notebooks. One of the greatest minds in human history becomes a name that maybe appears in a footnote somewhere. A promising young Florentine artist who was convicted of sodomy in 1476, and that was that. That's how close it was. But getting out didn't mean it was over, because what Leonardo did after 1476 tells you everything about what those 2 months did to him. He went quiet. Not about his work. He kept painting, kept sketching, kept filling those notebooks. But about himself. The door closed. Permanently. He never married. He left no documented relationships. He wrote his most private thoughts in mirror script, backwards, readable only in mirror, so nobody could simply pick up a notebook and read what he was actually thinking. He built a wall around his personal life, so complete that 5 centuries of historians have barely scratched it. And there is one line buried in his notebooks that some historians believe refers directly to 1476. It reads, "When I made the child of God the Father, you put me in prison." Saltarelli may have been the model for the painting being described. If that reading is right, Leonardo carried that memory all the way through his career, and it surfaced once. One cryptic line in the private pages he never meant for anyone to read. In 1482, 6 years after the accusation, he left Florence entirely and moved to Milan. He arrived not as a painter looking for commissions, but reportedly as a musician. A clean start, a new city, a man who had learned the hard way what happened when Florence decided to notice you. The officers of the night were shut down in 1494, 18 years after that note was dropped into the box. The whole system was dismantled. The tamburo came off the wall. The files closed. Historians have since documented extensively how the system was regularly used to settle personal scores, destroy rivalries, and eliminate political inconveniences. The anonymous nature of it made it perfect for that. All the damage, none of the consequences. The person who used it against Leonardo in April 1476 got away clean, never identified, never held accountable, gone. And Leonardo went on to paint the Mona Lisa, the Last Supper, and fill thousands of notebook pages with ideas that are still being studied today. The note meant to erase him became the most famous footnote in Renaissance history, and he became everything else. If this story got you, hit like and subscribe. Every week there's another story from the Renaissance that most people have never heard.